Good morning. We start our service by ringing this bell. We ring it 3 times. The first is to call us into covenant, to renew and rebuild a relationship. We invoke and invite the presence of this land's forebearers, those to whom we did wrong and with whom we need repair. We occupy the unceded land of the Muwekma tribe of the Ohlone people. The second calls us into relationship with ourselves and one another, that we open ourselves to the wisdom of the diverse array of people and practices that surround us, that we learn to invite an ever-widening circle of compassion and commitment until we are all beloved to each other. And the third is to call us into relationship with our children and our children's children out to the 7th generation, that we may be reminded that what we do now or what we fail to do will be felt by those who come after us.
Good morning. I'm Paul K. Davis, Worship Associate this morning, with our Reverend Greg Ward in the pulpit. Music today will be provided by our own Jessica Steele and Jay Steele, with a special guest for 2 musical offerings, soprano Julika Hing of the University of Karlsruhe in Germany, who is in town visiting her cousins, the Steeles. Also, please note, there are some last-minute changes to the order of service. Reverend Greg will explain the chalice lighting words, and our closing hymn will be number 1014 in our teal hymnal, Answering the Call of Love. But all the slides we show will be your correct words. Thank you, Eric. As many of you know, I have frequently been a political and social activist in both my public and personal life, beginning in my college days. But I have also frequently been a bystander on major issues, held back sometimes by other concerns, but also by my contemplations. I don't like to get involved when I'm uncertain of critical facts, when I am perplexed what action might be successful, when I fear my actions may be misinterpreted, or when I feel powerless in the situation. An example is my history with gay rights. For decades, I declined to support gay rights in political programs, despite the fact that I have not considered homosexuality morally wrong, and have had gay friends since my college days whose lives I could see being negatively impacted by our legal system. I thought it was a hopeless cause. Only when I became a union leader at work did I actively engage with the cause, pressing for fair, equal benefits for same-sex partners and spouses. Another example is the anti-nuclear weapons movement. For most of my life, I have considered nuclear war the greatest threat to all of us, but felt unable to engage positively. I'm embarrassed to discover that friends have successfully engaged and accomplished positive results, though we clearly need much, much more progress. I have now taken up education and advocacy related to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which both directly threatens nuclear war and which reveals the new danger of an otherwise safe and peacefully used nuclear reactor being held hostage, or worse, purposely turned into a weapon. My quest to achieve a good balance and mutual support between activism and contemplation. Please join with us in worship to explore working toward that balance.
It is my first service this month, which means, if you remember, It is our time to turn to the covenant that we created to hold one another to each other's and ourselves' best selves. It's a covenant that we drew up a couple years ago to help give us strength, help us be resilient, be resourceful, and infuse a sense of love into everything that we do. The Committee on Ministry and myself thought that by focusing on one of the tenets of our covenant each month, it would help us to become more intuitive about our promises to one another, so that those promises became a reflex or a habit of the heart. Last month, we explored the preamble to our covenant, and today we explore our first aspiration. So please join me in reciting these words which call us into community with one another and Unitarian Universalists all across the globe. We aspire to the highest levels of trust. To be trustworthy, we will show up, do what we say we will do, and communicate with kindness. To practice trust, we will focus on the best within people.
All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Mission Peak Unitarian Universalist Congregation. My name is Deanna Alm, and I'm a member of the board. We're so glad that you've joined us this morning. Despite the sticky humidity out there, it's always nice to get out in the fresh air. Unitarian Universalism is a radically inclusive, non-doctrinal, non-dogmatic, open-minded, and open-hearted faith. We are people who are all coming at truth from different paths. We gather together across different identities, experiences, and beliefs to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Together, we see our job is to love the hate out of the world, heal the hurt in ourselves and one another, and be the change that we'd like to see. We use chat and Zoom or our book near the welcome table to share joys and concerns, personal milestones of importance that will be read aloud during the service. Perhaps you're here for the first time. We've been reaching out and asking people to bring their friends because we think the world, especially now, needs some friendly places to gather and find encouragement and hope. Now, usually we have social hour after the service where we get to visit with one another in breakout rooms or on the patio, but today we're asking you to stick around for a brief meeting after the service. The worship host will give you some more information about how this will work immediately afterward. In the meantime, we'll put a link to our weekly newsletter in the chat so you can see all the events coming up. Or rather, since I'm also the membership rep today, I'll put it in there as soon as I get back to the table. We encourage you to join anything that speaks to you. And we also put our welcome email, welcome@npuuc.org, to request a newsletter or other information be sent to you. There are a few things I'd like to call your attention to. First of all, I want to thank everyone, again, who found time and made the time to respond to our COVID-19 response survey. You can find the article about the results in last week's Week on the Peak, and it will also repeat again on the September 14th Week on the Peak, As both best public health practice and the preference of the majority of our responders, we are continuing to require that attendees be masked inside and outside Cole Hall during the service. We have N95 and KN95 masks available at the welcome table. We are continuing to allow eating and drinking outside after the service. There does appear to be some interest in having snacks, tea, coffee available afterwards, and snacks are occasionally being provided on sort of an ad hoc basis. Because we have fewer in-person attendees in the past, it might be possible to provide a simpler coffee service, but it's going to involve volunteers who are willing to do setup and cleanup. If that's a task you're interested in taking on, please email me, deannaalm7@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to help work with you to get that set up. Again, we're having our meeting afterwards, and this is because we're doing things a little bit differently this year. This year, we're having an in-person holiday boutique on November 5th. It'll be here in Cole Hall, and masking will be required. And then we're going to hold a virtual black and white auction later in the congregational year. So again, I'll be sharing more information about that after the service. I'm going to host the in-person meeting, and then for all of our Zoomers, we're going to randomly split you into 2 groups, and those will be led by other people who are working on this event. Please do stick around. We're looking for ideas, inspiration, and as always, some helping hands. In addition, please, again, look at last week's Week on the Peak. There are links in there in the article about the boutique where you can sign up to help by donating or providing some help on the day of the event. Finally, please do silence your electronic devices. If you hear or see something in this morning's service that inspires you, makes you laugh, or brings you hope, please tweet it or share it on social media or just tell a friend. We are trying to start a wave of love and justice with every gathering. Thanks again for joining us.
Voice still and small, deep inside, oh, I hear you call, singing. In dark and rain, sorrow and pain, still you remain, singing. Calming my fears, quenching my tears, through all the years, singing. We still in. Sorry. Voice still and slow, deep inside, oh, I hear you call, singing. In dark and rain, sorrow and pain, still you remain, singing. Calming my fears, quenching my tears, through all the years, singing.
In Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, at the center of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people, that they were mine and I theirs, that we could not be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers. It was like waking from a dream of separateness, of spurious self-isolation in a special world. This sense of liberation from an illusory difference was such a relief and such a joy to me that I almost laughed out loud. I have the immense joy of being man, a member of a race in which God himself became incarnate, as if the sorrows and stupidities of the human condition could overwhelm me now that I realize what we all are. And if only everybody could realize this, but it cannot be explained. There is no way of telling people that they are all walking around shining like the sun. Then it was as if I suddenly saw the secret beauty of their hearts, the depths of their hearts, where neither sin nor desire nor self-knowledge can reach the core of the reality, the person that each one is in God's eyes. If only they could all see themselves as they really are. If only we could see each other that way all the time. There would be no more war, no more hatred, no more cruelty, no more greed. But this cannot be seen, only believed and understood by a peculiar gift.
In the midst of a global pandemic, a spiraling climate crisis, escalated threats to our democracy, nationwide uprisings demanding racial justice, what does it look like to side with love?
It looks like fighting voter suppression, reaching out to over 3 million voters, and mobilizing a historic number of people to turn out in the state and national elections.
It looks like showing up in solidarity with Indigenous water protectors resisting the disastrous Line 3 pipeline.
It looks like welcoming protesters into your congregation sanctuary when they need a safe place to gather out of the way of state-sanctioned violence.
It looks like advocating for critical national legislation like the Equality Act, the BREATHE Act, and the For the People Act.
It looks like testifying in front of your city council to support moving money to community safety, security, and stability instead of increasing big police budgets.
It looks like serving as an election defender to ensure that every eligible voter can access the ballot freely, fairly, and without intimidation.
As Unitarian Universalists, we believe in the democratic process. We believe in our radical interdependence with one another and the earth. We believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. These values aren't just ideas. They compel us to side with love by joining forces to build a world in which all people are free and thriving. Our faith calls us to solidarity, to courage, to resistance, to action. All forms of oppression are interlinked, just as all our struggles for liberation are bound up together. Whether we are organizing for a stronger democracy, combating criminalization and white supremacy, advocating for the rights of LGBTQ people, or working to get back into right relationship with the earth, we are answering the mandate of our faith to side with love.
Side with Love is the umbrella for all of our justice-focused trainings and campaigns and programs. We are the outward-facing justice ministries of the Unitarian Universalist Association. While we focus on any number of different specific issues through our programs and campaigns, we also fundamentally understand that all of these struggles are deeply interconnected and interwoven and intersecting.
At its most basic level, Side with Love brings Unitarian Universalists into partnership with each other and with broader movements for justice.
Side with Love is the hub of collective action, learning, and reflection for thousands of Unitarian Universalists in hundreds of congregations across the country.
And the UUA's organizing strategy team, the staff who share responsibility for Side with Love, are working to bring Unitarian Universalists ways to ground, to grow, and to act together.
Side with Love offers political education to develop a deeper understanding of the most critical justice issues impacting our communities Side with Love also provides ongoing spiritual sustenance as a way of nourishing the people as we struggle and organize for the long haul.
UUs and their congregations are always looking for ways to build their collective power, to deepen their partnerships with frontline organizations, to sharpen their leadership and organizing skills. Side with Love's organizing strategy team creates a wide range of trainings and leadership development opportunities to equip our people to grow their skills so we can show up boldly, courageously, and effectively whenever and however love calls us to respond.
We like to say that love is a practice, not a theory. Side with Love uses a distributed model that invites Unitarian Universalists to take meaningful and strategic action together in service of our values. Whether it's a national phone bank to mobilize voters in Georgia during the runoff elections, or a coordinated congregational letter writing campaign in support of the Breathe Act, or bringing national muscle to local battles to divest from the police and invest in community safety in Phoenix, Side with Love and our various intersecting campaigns supports UUs in acting for justice and liberation on the local and national levels.
Side with Love is so proud to support thousands of Unitarian Universalists across the country every year through our campaigns and our trainings and our programs. And we need your help to make that work be possible. So when you give to Side with Love today, what you are supporting are things like hosting critical phone banks to call and reach out to mobilize voters in key areas. You're helping to fund the next iteration of organizing school, training up justice leaders in congregations around the country. You're supporting political education online events where we bring Unitarian Universalists into conversation with some of the most brilliant organizers and movement leaders working today. You're also supporting things like coaching and support for congregations and state advocacy networks that are showing up courageously and faithfully for movement moments in their own communities.
Our Unitarian Universalist faith calls us to embody our deepest values by harnessing our power, acting boldly, and committing to long-haul organizing work for justice. It's our responsibility to show up now, more skilled, more grounded, more courageous than ever. Now is our time.
When we UU the vote.
When we create climate justice.
When we uplift the thriving of LGBTQ communities.
When we declare that love resists criminalization in all its forms.
When we share our resources, care for our communities, and organize mutual aid.
When we embrace each other's humanity and fight for liberation.
We side with love. Please, give generously.
Our partnering with Side with Love is like all the partnerships we endeavor to cultivate. It is to help make the difference that we are capable of making. This partnership is with UUs all across the country, and it supports election rights and turnout, gender justice, including women's rights to safe medical care, support for our LGBTQ siblings, and safety for people of color, whether they are U.S. citizens or simply living in our borders. To donate to Side to Love, send a check made out to MPUUC, putting Side with Love in the memo line, and mail it to MPUUC, P.O. Box 545, Fremont 94537. And if you use bill pay with your bank, you could use them to mail the check, or drop an envelope with check in Mission PQU mail slot addressed to us. Envelopes are available at the welcome table for those of you here in Cole Hall, or you can pay online through the website identified there and on our regular website with a credit or debit card. But note that We use PayPal for this, and they charge us around 3%. Do please support these worthy causes by making your check to MPUUC, as described just now on the screen. Remember the Side with Love in the memo line if it's for the Side with Love campaign, or pledge if it's your pledge. Thank you for supporting and sustaining the values which our members, friends, and staff work so hard to uphold. Your contributions make loving, learning, leadership, and justice more possible.
One of the things that allows us to find hope and meaning, especially in the difficult times, is the love and the support we show each other. If you have a joy or a concern that by sharing will invite a deeper connection with this community, either through solace or celebration, we invite you to write your name, whether your sharing is a joy or a concern, and a brief one-sentence sharing of what you are holding in your heart. Know that you are held by the healing hope of this community, and if your need for understanding or connection is more personal, I invite you to send me or Reverend Barbara an email, and we will have a follow-up conversation. If you would like to drop a stone, please come forward and drop a stone in our stone garden, or place a sacred object in your altar at home.
Hello everybody, my name is Julika and I brought two arias for you today. I am from Germany. I'm very happy to be here with you today. I want to say a few words about the first piece I'm going to sing now. It is about someone who has done a mistake. Like, we're all human and we do mistakes, and the person is begging to God to forgive. And in the end of that cantata from Bach, forgiveness is given. Yes, it starts with the recitativo, which is more free, and then the aria follows. Mein Herz schwirrt im Blut, weil ich der Sünden ruht in Gottes heiligen Augen zum Ungeheuer Macht. Und Ach Gott, wer wird dich doch zufriedenstellen?
That must be our first joy to just say, wow. These are the joys and the concerns that overflow from our heart this week. A joy that the Ukrainian people are having success, resisting Putin's invasion, sorrow that so many lives have been lost. And finally, one last stone for all of the love in our heart, that it finds a place in the world, that we feel grounded in all we do, and in the process that we keep our hearts, our arms, our doors, and our mind open. Amen. Please join with me in the spirit of this reflection, or this reading. This reading this morning is from the Reverend Dr. Bob Moorhead, if I can get this to open up. It is called The Paradox of Our Time. The paradox of our time in history is an interesting one. We have made steady advances through repeated concessions. We have taller buildings but shorter tempers, wider freeways but narrower viewpoints. We spend more but have less. We own bigger houses and raise smaller families. We have more conveniences but less time. We earn more, especially college degrees, but exercise less common sense, have more knowledge, but use less judgment. We turn to old experts to point out new problems. We have more medicine, but less wellness. We have added years to our life, but not life to our years. We have multiplied our possessions, but reduced their value. We talk too much, love too seldom, and hate too often. We have learned how to make a living, but not a life. We have learned to rush, but forgotten how to wait or rest. We build more computers to hold more information, to produce more copies than ever, but have less communication. These are the times of tall men and short character, steep profits and shallow relationships. We endlessly praise peace, but unceasingly prepare for war. We dream of more leisure, but take fewer vacations, have more food, but less nutrition. These are the days of 2 incomes, but more divorces, fancier houses, but broken homes. It is a time when there is much in the store window and little in the stockroom. A time where a million tools can help you calculate something's worth, but nothing can help you discover your own. A time where fullness abounds and feelings of emptiness are everywhere. It is the paradox of our times that we seem to want so much love and love so much want.
So the second piece is an aria from the bigger piece Messiah from Handel. that is usually sung during Easter.
One seeking to make meaning from the paradoxical reality we live in can get very far without first working through some fundamental questions. Variations of these questions are placed before each spiritual novitiate, and they serve as exercises for mastering the contemplative life. In Eastern traditions, there are Zen koans. In Middle Eastern practices, there are parables. In the West, there is the internet. In this sermon about the importance and the limits of contemplative practice, let me begin by offering this round of warm-up questions to prepare us for the rigors of right thinking and moral decision-making that line the path between the ordinary life and enlightenment. These questions were generously provided by the many quasi-enlightened people who are contemplatives living in the World Wide Web. Some of these questions are theoretical or even whimsical, such as, do sheep get static cling when they rub against each other? Why is abbreviated such a long word? What is another word for thesaurus? Why are there interstate highways in Hawaii? If a bunch of cats jump on top of each other, is it still called a dog pile? But after a few of these, it is important to move on to the more pragmatic arena of life's concerns, questions that point out our confusion and our conflicted nature in which we remain stuck. These include, when going to a movie theater, deciding which armrest is yours, or figuring out how to handcuff a one-armed prisoner, or whether to install emergency exits on a prison bus, determining whether it's possible for a shorter person to talk down to a taller one, or how far east do you have to go before you're actually heading west? Eventually, this progresses to a point where we begin to encounter the truly moral questions that stand at the gateway of the depth we seek. For instance, if a prisoner has a heart attack on the way to the electric chair, should you save them? What do you do when you see an endangered animal eating an endangered plant? What happens when an irresistible force hits an immovable object? And finally, you arrive at questions of paradox that mark the threshold of moral awakening. If you hate a hater, do you hate yourself? If you try to fail and succeed, which have you done? And if you decide to be indecisive, have you succeeded or failed? Of course, there are those people who meet these questions with impatience, who dismiss their value, especially when they feel the heat of the world on fire all around them and recognize the precariousness of the days in which we live. How are we going to get guns off the street, they ask, much less out of our children's classrooms or in places of worship, if we don't take to the streets and create a compelling movement? How can we ever expect for Black lives to matter if we don't force the legislation to decriminalize the communities that they live in and shuttle them through the black to prison pipeline? How will we save the rainforest from clear cutting, mountaintops from strip mining, water supplies from becoming toxic dumping grounds, and leave anything for our children to inherit if we don't challenge corporations' insatiable and unregulated lust for profit? What good is sitting around navel-gazing when terrorism is rampant, human rights are threatened, and political corruption abounds? It's been 21 years to the day since 9/11. Haven't we learned anything about letting our guard down? Indeed, what have we learned in the 60 years since the Holocaust about the futility of discussion groups during genocide? These questions, asked by those people, are also essential to consider. I know because I agree with those people at least half the time. I want to share a couple stories with you today, and I start with this one about Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton was one of the world's great religious thinkers and teachers. He was also someone who was caught squarely in between the contemplative impulse and an activist's agency. Merton was born into a family of means, to a mostly absent artistic father and a rather self-absorbed mother who died when he was 6. Merton was sent to a boarding school and eventually went to Columbia University. He was very well educated, but he felt somewhat removed or apart from the world and critical of the way that it was acting. In 1941, after college, Thomas Merton entered Gethsemane, a Trappist monastery in Kentucky, seeking the quiet contemplative's life, but he could not suppress the voice within him. It was a voice caught in between trying to make sense of the world and trying to make it better. After he wrote a couple books of poetry and then an autobiography, he wrote a book called Seeds of Contemplation, which won him the attention and praise of both theologians and psychologists and the literati. But in 1961, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, he wrote an article about peace called "The Root of War is Fear." It stirred great controversy, especially among patriots who sometimes conflated love of God with love of country. But it was 2 pieces that he published after that which really brought the controversy forward. The first, in 1964, after Kennedy's assassination, he wrote Seeds of Destruction, which addressed Vietnam, racism, nuclear weapons, and American imperialism. He regarded all of these as spiritual crises. And then in 1966, he wrote a book called Raids on the Unspeakable, which pointed out the violence sown into the very fabric of today's social and political climate, and that feigned virtue and innocence while doing destruction. When Seeds of Destruction came out with its prophecy that if we follow this path, it will only get worse, Thomas Merton was taken to task by Martin Marty, well-known theologian and urban activist, who reviewed the book. Marty said, in effect, "How dare this cloistered monk hiding out in the woods tell those of us on the front lines that the racial problems we are working hard to solve are going to blow up in our face?" Perhaps a little story closer to home will unveil how this tension bears relevance to our current lives and situation, and perhaps even explain a little bit about this morning's Share the Plate partner, Side with Love. For many years, I have been a very close friend of Jason Shelton's. Jason is one of our denomination's foremost musicians and composers. He has written a number of well-known pieces that are in our Teal hymnal, and he helped to chair the commission task force that created that. And we've all probably sung many of his hymns, including Morning Has Come and Fire of Commitment, and his #1 hit, Standing on the Side of Love. Now, or as it's renamed, but we'll get to that later. Jason shared with me the origins of that song, how he happened to be at UUA headquarters on May 17th, 2004, which happened to be the morning that the Massachusetts Supreme Court ruled in favor of same-sex marriage. And Jason happened to be in President Bill Sinkford's office when phones began ringing off the hook when this hit the news. Turns out that the original plaintiff in the case was a woman named Hillary Goodrich, who is not only a lifelong UU, but also worked for the UUA. And in fact, 9 of the other 14 plaintiffs in the case were also UU. So reporters wanted to get a quote from the UU president about our stance on the issue. And as reporters are wont to do, he tried to suck Sinkford into saying something controversial. So where do UUs stand on the issue, he asked, with the court or with the majority of Americans? Which you have to remember, back in 2004, same-sex marriage had not risen to the wide acceptance it has today. Bill thought, and then he responded quite calmly. We don't stand on the side of the courts or on the side of those who object to the decision. We stand on the side of love. Listening in to that conversation, Jason's eyes got very wide. He immediately grabbed a pen and started writing lyrics. He said that he finished that song, Standing on the Side of Love, in about 15 minutes. And he shared it with the music network who were gathering at headquarters that afternoon and evening. But that's not the end of the story. The song, as you know, went viral within the UU universe. It was sung in congregations. It was sung in ministers' gatherings. It was sung at General Assembly ad infinitum. It was made into a popular CD. It found a prominent place in our second hymnal. And in 2009, an entire justice advocacy campaign was named Standing on the Side of Love. And they produced tons of yellow t-shirts, which people all over the denomination bought and wore, so that the song and the campaign swelled into a movement where people took pride in wearing those yellow shirts and became known as the yellow shirt people whenever we went to demonstrations. We loved being able to look out and recognize one another in our yellow shirts, and it was a powerful, unifying moment where people felt the power of love and why we really belong to each other and why we belong to this faith. Or so we thought. Because a few years after that, in 2017, came General Assembly. Jason and I, for many years, roomed together at GA, and I remember him that year coming up to our room after the opening worship where we sang Standing on the Side of Love, and he came up to the room and was very troubled. I was just in a conversation with someone who stopped me and said that she thinks standing on the side of love is problematic. She wants to change the words. Change the words? I asked, somewhat incredulous. Yeah, this woman told me to change the words, and she was in a wheelchair. She told me that when she is sitting in a whole auditorium of people who are excitedly singing, "We are standing on the side of love," and I can't stand, I feel like the message is, I don't belong here. He said it struck him, but he didn't know what to say, and so he ran the idea past a couple other people that he saw on the way up to the room. And he noted that some of those people that he asked questioned, well, how many people are we talking about? And that they said, maybe they should just get over it. I wish I could tell you in that conversation he had with me that I was immediately converted, but the truth is that I, in my privilege of being a lifelong able-bodied person, had to think about it. How do we get stuck in that paradox of standing paralysis, where we advance through repeated concessions, where we have tall orders and short tempers, wide pathways and narrow points of view, lots of knowledge but little judgment? In a book written a few years ago about the threat to American democracy, author Parker Palmer talks about this country's slide toward intractable polarization, where he describes our adoption of a new default setting, what we today call cancel culture. Within me, he says, is the potential for spiritual destruction, so violent that I can be tempted by a fantasy to kill you off when you threaten something within me, some habit or preference or element of self-righteousness that I feel attached to. And of course, I will not kill you off with a weapon, but with a mental dismissal. Some way of putting you, in my mind, into a category of people whose opinions mean nothing to me. Doing so means I no longer need to be bothered by your otherness or by the tension it creates in me. That, it seems to me, is the spiritual equivalent of murder. I have rendered you utterly irrelevant in my life. No one wanted to cancel the woman in the wheelchair. She simply wanted a place among people who she thought were hers. Somewhere that she could be seen, somewhere beyond doubt, beyond being ignored or canceled, where it was clear she belonged on the side of love. It simply didn't cross people's mind that they were sowing seeds of destruction that cut her off from her sense of belonging. Those seeds of destruction lasted for over 10 years, where vast realms of very worthy UUs were placed beyond belonging because they were literally living under our field of view. Bill Sinkford also wasn't thinking exclusion when he first uttered that phrase to the reporter. Indeed, his intent was quite the opposite of being very inclusive, but it still took a decade to realize how it made us all a little smaller every time he repeated it, each time we sang it. There's something about trust that's essential in building cohesion with others, in finding congruence with our own best intentions. When trust is broken, it needs repair, or we simply have to accept living smaller than we otherwise would. We need trust restored to fully show up, to ensure our actions are considerate and kind, to really comprehend the best in the people in front of us. This morning, during the Story for All Ages, with the backdrop of the Black Lives Matter protests, I don't know if you could hear the words, but it was the words of Thomas Merton, quoted from an essay in Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander. Part of it said this: in Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the center of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people, that they were mine and I was theirs, that we could not be alien to one another even though we were total strangers. It was like walking from a dream of separateness, of spurious self-isolation in a special world, to see that they were all walking around shining like the sun. If only they could all see themselves as they really are. If only we could all see each other that way all the time, there would be no more war. There would be no more hatred, no more cruelty, no more greed. But this cannot be seen, only believed and understood by a peculiar gift. As I said, these words came from Merton's 1968 book, Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander. The words are a powerful contrast to the brokenheartedness contained in many of the other essays that were in the book, essays which touch on the impulses behind the assassinations of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Robert Kennedy, and all the lives lost in the shattering of innocence that were part of the false enlightenment of American imperialism. When the book came out, Merton became the recipient of many passionate reviews. Comments came from both sides of the ideological spectrum, and ironically, they all built up the very paradox that Merton was endeavoring to resolve. In the cacophony of opinions which followed, we not only bore witness to our own divisions as a people and the trust which felt broken between us, but the vehemence with which the chaos of our separation was held in place. And it was as though the world were divided between those who were standing and those in a wheelchair, differing heights of people talking down to each other, not understanding that what was needed was to join hands and side with love. And so it is that we all stumble, often alone, toward enlightenment. Why does it take so long? Why is contemplation so essential when action is so urgent? Perhaps we can glimpse part of the reason by understanding the phenomenon known as the bystander effect. The bystander effect is something you may have heard about. It is simply a social paralysis that exists in the moment of great crisis, when harm is imminent and a large number of people are present to bear witness. We get stuck in thinking that someone else, someone perhaps more qualified, will step forward and make the difference that's needed, or that something will happen so that I don't have to risk making a mistake and appearing foolish. Back to the question, if you decide to be indecisive, have you succeeded or failed? No progress is ever made except through a series of mistakes corrected. The power and blessing that contemplation bestows in our lives of collective awakening is the ability to step or wheel yourself forward until you are in the presence of the best in one another. To truly know we are all just shining like the sun. Anything less, and we are bringing violence in our approach. When Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander came out, one of the reviews that came to Merton was an open letter addressed to him that was printed in the National Catholic Reporter. It was an apology, and it was from Martin Marty. He was apologizing for having put down seeds of destruction. And he said, with everything that's happened since that book came out, it's evident that you were correct. What bothers me now, he continued, is the degree of accuracy in your predictions and prophecies in general. At the time, I thought you were trying to be a white James Baldwin. Now it seems to me you were telling it like it is, and maybe as it will be. Friends, the call toward contemplation is simply the work required to see it like it is, instead of how our ego or our righteousness wants it to be. And it is the work of seeing others as they are, part of a great constellation, helping us all chart the best course. Each person in the constellation simply a star, shining like the sun, to the glory of life.
you're playing a longer version, I think. Yeah, are you starting from the beginning? The promise of the Spirit, faith, hope, and love abide. With every soul is blessed and made whole. The truth in our hearts is God, answering the call of love. Hands joined together as one, emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim we are answering the call of love. Sometimes we build a barrier to keep love tightly bound, corrupted by fear, unwilling to hear, denying the beauty we found, are answering the call of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one, emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim we are answering the call of love. A bright day is dawning, when love will not divide. Reflections of grace in every embrace, fulfilling the beauty divine. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one, embodied by faith, we dare to proclaim we are answering the call of love. We are answering the call of love.
Each person is a star shining like the sun to the glory of life. May we make that come true.
Amen.